The thing for Manchester United is that it could actually get worse before it gets better. And I think that might be the process that they're actually going through now. You know, the manager said he's not for changing his system. And I think he's right to do that, not to sort of adapt. He's been brought in for a reason, to play that system and to provide at Manchester United what he provided in Lisbon with sport and the success they had. So I think it would be wrong to change, but that means I think they may have to go through a little bit more pain.
Well, he said it himself, that could be the way forward, couldn't it? 10 games so far for Ruben Amorim. Here's a reminder of how they have played out so far. Decent start, especially with those back-to-back victories. A convincing win at home over Everton. The set pieces were their undoing at Arsenal. Disappointing to lose at home to Forest. But I suppose, Jamie, if you get to that Man City game in that place, you're pretty happy, aren't you?
Listen, when a new manager comes in, I think we give them a little bit of slack. We understand it's not easy. He's coming with a different system. But the one big mistake he made, I feel, was the team he picked at Tottenham. And not necessarily through the fact that it was to win the cup. On the back of the Manchester City result, they had to keep the momentum going. You know, you look at those results there and win some, lose some, you win the derby. The way they won it as well was fantastic. You know, the buzz for Manchester United fans in the stadium, watching at home. They've beaten Pep Guardiola, the biggest rivals, and then you go to Tottenham. It didn't need to change the team as much, and he needed to just keep that going. And then you look where they are now, 3 defeats in a row, and they feel like they're in a really poor position now.
Gary, how do you reflect on that start? And do you see signs of progress within those results?
No, I agree with what Jamie's just said about the changes that are being made from sort of game to game. It's something that Erik used to do, and then even in game, changing the defence. You know, it seems like every single match. There was a game against Nottingham Forest that was within that list, and I thought he picked his best team that day. I thought, here we go, he's actually going to settle on this 11 and then stick with them. And it was 1-1 at half-time, and I thought they played some good stuff in the first half. The second half, they had 2 individual errors at the start of the second half, and then he took off 2 of his back 3, took off Bruno Fernandes, and almost threw the baby out with the bathwater a little bit. And it's been a little bit like that since, whereby he's never settled on a team. And I'm going to ask him that when I speak to him very shortly, about the fact that is it now time to create some stability? You know, they've not picked up his idea, but how difficult is it for the players to pick up the idea if they've not got that pattern of, if you like, playing together? So it's something that I think needs to be asked.
We'll go into a more detailed look at the numbers, Gary, and we'll dial in on the Premier League in particular. 7 games that he's had in the Premier League so far, and this is what it's looked like before Amorim and with him in charge. So you can see that drop straight away in points from 1.4 to 1 per game. Slight increase in goals, but also a larger increase in goals conceded from 1.1 to 1.7. Now that would be a worry, obviously, but let's have a look now at the sort of underlying numbers. The shots are dropping from 14 to 12.6 per game. The expected goals has gone down as well, from 1.6 to 1.2. And the defensive numbers do suggest there is improvement being made, even though they're actually conceding more goals. They're facing fewer shots. The XG against has dropped from 1.6 to 1.2, but perhaps that can be explained away by that huge drop in save ratio, down to 59% under Amorim, and the amount of goals they're conceding from corners, 4 before him, and 5 in those 7 games under him, which is the worst of anybody in the league. What are you seeing in terms of that style, Jamie?
Well, the last manager, we obviously highlighted it and looked at it, and you look at the style comparison and the fact that they're keeping a lot more possession. You know, we see that, you can see that in numbers as you go down, how many passes per shot, obviously one of the worst in the Premier League, touches in the opposition box, big chances created, I think is a real big worry.
Down from 2.5 to 1.6 per game.
Because Erik team weren't a team who created a lot of chances. So it almost feels to me what he's taken out of this team, which, and rightly so, was Manchester United weren't a football team under Erik They were like a basketball team. It was just end to end. It wasn't sustainable. They picked up a lot of injuries, and constantly the opposition were having 15, 20 shots at their goal. So we had to stop that. Now, there's no doubt there's more control. There's more possession, but there's no threat at all. And that will have to change in the future, of course. But in these early stages, it's probably a little bit like how Louis van Gaal was when he came into Manchester United, where it probably wasn't that exciting. There was a little bit more control, a little bit more possession, but it wasn't on the front foot as much as Manchester United. And of course, that went on for 2 or 3 years with Louis van Gaal. We're in the early stages under this manager, but eventually he'll need to bring that excitement back to Manchester United.
You saw as well that bottom line, that they were running less distance under Amorim, but also the high-intensity sprints is down, and the distance they are covering at high intensity is also down under Ruben Amorim. And that's something he did talk about when he first came into the job. He needs his players to run. What would be the biggest concern of all those numbers, Gary?
I think that's one of the biggest. I mean, he highlighted that in the interview that I did with him in his first week, that the players needed to be more athletic. They've obviously gone backwards, but hopefully, as Jamie said, that's going backwards to go forwards. It's been very slim pickings in terms of positives in the first few weeks, but maybe the performances of Ahmad Mazraoui have been okay. I think the fact he's willing to take on big players and not pander to them like Garnacho and Rashford, I think is something that's a positive. I think maybe the most positive thing, I think, is that he's seeing what these players really are, and that we're not getting that bounce that would have then maybe made him think that they're better than they are. I think he thought it would be a big job, but it's a massive job, and at least he's finding that out early when he's got power and strength in the position.
Gary, should we have expected a lot more than what we're seeing from Manchester United since the manager came in? I know there's a lot being made about the system change and the players have got used to that, but that was something you were actually calling for under the last manager, because you actually felt there was enough players in this squad that could adapt to sort of a three at the back.
Yeah, I'm not going to rewrite history. I was actually quite excited about them going to a three at the back, purely because I didn't think that their centre-backs and full-backs in the sort of way in which they play were good enough to play in a back four. Plus, you look at the likes of Yoro, who's come back now, and you look at Martinez, and you think of Maguire and De Ligt, you think that's an ideal back three in terms of it should suit them. You'd like to think that in midfield then they've got Agati and Mainu, who played in that game against Nottingham Forest that I mentioned, and you think, OK, that's a decent midfield too. Hoyland's been OK up front. It's those two positions behind the central striker and the two wing-back positions that have been a real struggle, I think, in these early sort of weeks and months. But I was expecting it, Carragher, to be a lot better. I was expecting them to feel quite empowered by the system and this change of idea, but they just haven't bounced at all off it, and it's taken them a long time, or longer than I think Ruben Amorim would like, to get used to it.
But it does feel like, Gary, there's almost like a general assumption that this will come good, that the club has to go through more short-term pain, but everything's going to be fine in the end. Are you convinced that this system will deliver the success that Manchester United and their fans so desperately crave?
No, I don't think any of us can be convinced, Dave, with what's happened in the last 10 years, and there's not seen enough yet to think that it could be any different. What I am surprised about, I didn't hear anybody in the summer when Manchester United signed those 3 or 4 players say, oh, Manchester United have had a terrible transfer market. I am shocked at how poor those players have been in the early months at this club. And it's happened again. I've said before that this club's been a bit of a graveyard for players who've come with decent reputations. But when they signed those players like Agate, De Ligt, Yoro, Xerxes, I didn't hear anybody say, oh, they've signed a load of bums. They've signed some half-decent players there that you thought would improve the squad. The problem is, when you've seen them play out here in a red shirt, they look like actually Manchester United are worse than they were before. So that's the bizarre thing, that's the odd thing that I'm trying to keep continuing to work out, because these lads all of a sudden become bad players overnight when they come to Manchester United. But that's what seems to be the case, and it's happening again before our eyes.
Sure, here's a more persuasive version. The Manchester United season has crumbled into farce, highlighted by a dismal performance against Newcastle. Once again, the team faced a predictable defeat at Old Trafford, deepening the crisis for manager Ruben Amorim. The only moment that sparked any cheer from the home crowd was the substitution of an out-of-sorts Joshua Xerxes, who was met with a mix of frustration and relief from the fans. Supporters expressed their anger toward goalkeeper Andre Onana for his time wasting, but their ire quickly turned to Xerxes. His constant struggle to keep pace on the pitch led to his removal in the 33rd minute, a decision that was met with loud applause. Amorim offered a token gesture of consolation, but as Xerxes departed for the tunnel, a mix of applause and jeers echoed around Old Trafford. The reaction was unprecedented. Many fans regretted their harshness when reflecting on the incident later. During half-time, the Stretford End's rendition of Ruben Amorim's Red and White Army captured the mood perfectly. While boos could be heard, they were drowned out by pockets of support. The introduction of Kobbie Mainoo for Xerxes had sparked promising chances for Rasmus Højlund and Casemiro, but the United team, despite their efforts, ultimately fell short against a Newcastle side that played with confidence. This was a stark reminder of United's struggles, as they faced their worst league run in nearly a decade, 3 consecutive losses, a record that hadn't been seen since December 2015. With only 7 points separating them from relegation, concerns are mounting as fans fear they could slip into the relegation zone next month. The sight of some fans leaving their seats after Alexander Isak's early goal was disheartening, as the mood around Old Trafford soured. Amorim's frustration was palpable from the start. Within just a few minutes, United found themselves trailing. In contrast, Newcastle showcased their firepower with Isak, a player they signed for £63 million, while United had spent even more on Højlund, who has yet to deliver on his hefty price tag. As the cries for a new striker grow louder, the pressure on Amorim mounts. The Newcastle lineup boasted players who outperformed United's options at almost every position, and it showed. The ease with which they dominated was alarming. The final scoreline was not just a statistic but a testament to the chasm between the two teams. Despite United's dismal display, there remains a glimmer of hope. The atmosphere at Old Trafford can still invoke fear in opponents, but that edge is fading fast. As Newcastle celebrated their triumph with glee, the once dominant United now sits 9 places and 10 points behind them, a stark reminder of how far they have fallen. Alan Shearer, who never tasted victory at Old Trafford during his illustrious career, will undoubtedly revel in this moment, while United supporters are left grappling with a harsh reality. Let me know if you need any further adjustments.